Hello and welcome back to another episode of Math with Stone. Today, we're going to be tackling the midpoint formula and doing it in a bunch of different ways to kind of show you the versatility of the formula, but also how to do it maybe an easier way sometimes. So when you're given a graph, okay, especially if you're given a graph, one of the easiest ways to find the midpoint, by definition, it's the middle point. So you can eyeball and just see where the middle is visually, and if you do that, you can take a guess and then confirm the guess afterwards. Now, that will work some of the time. It won't work all the time. But in this case, it looks like the midpoint is -1, 2, 3, -1, 2, 3. So it looks like it's -3, -3. Now, let's confirm that it is, in fact, -3, -3. So if it is the midpoint, whatever we did to get to this point, we would have to do the same thing to get to the next point at the very far end. So in this case, if I start at the bottom left, I went up by 2 and over by 2. So my slope, in a way, is 2 over 2. So if I went up by 2 and over by 2, now I just have to make sure I do that again. And if I do go up by 2 and over by 2 again, then I found the middle because I did the same thing twice. Okay, so we were halfway there, and then we did. We went up by 2, over by 2, and then we went up by 2, over by 2 again to get to the end point, which does, in fact, make this the midpoint of that line. Okay? Now, that will work some of the time. It will not work all of the time. All right? It will not work if the middle is kind of difficult to see, like it is on number 5. Here, if we're trying to find the midpoint here, it looks like it's at a decimal spot, okay? And I'm not sure what that is. That's a big old question mark. And if that's the case, then you may as well add the x's and then divide by 2, and add the two y values and then divide by 2. This is the midpoint formula, okay? Where you add the x's, they technically do x1, x2, and then y1 and y2. They have little subscripts here, okay? But you really just need to know what are the two x values, and then add them up and divide by 2, which gets you the middle. You cut it in half, all right? So let's do that here. The first x value, the first point is 0, 0, and this point over here is at 5, 4, all right? So if I add my two x values, 0 is the first x value, and 5 is the second x value. If I add those up, 0 plus 5, and divide by 2, you get your point for x of 5 over 2, which you could also write as 2.5, which is why that midpoint didn't really look like it was a clean point. It was like 2.5, but we weren't certain. Now, it does look like the y value is going to be 2, so let's see if the y value is 2. If we add the y values up right here, we have 0 for the first y value, and we have 4 for the second y value. So if we add 0 and 4 together, you get 4. And if we divide that by 2, 4 divided by 2 is 2, which is what we expected. See how this point looks like it's at 2.5, 2? That's what it should be. So we have our midpoint at 2.5, 2, which you might have been able to guess visually, but it'd be more certain with the midpoint formula. Okay? Let's do it with values that are only as points, which actually, when it's only as a point, I do not recommend graphing in most cases. You have your x1, you have your y1. You have your x2, you got your y2. You got your midpoint formula, which is add your x's and divide by 2. And then add your y's and divide by 2. You got x1, x2 divided by 2. So here are my two x values. We got -4 and 5. What is -4 plus 5? And then divided by 2? That would be -4 plus 5 is +1 divided by 2 is 1/2, or you could write 0.5. And then the y values, we have +4 added with -1 divided by 2. +4 minus 1 is 3. 3 over 2 would be that value, which you could write as 0.5 and 1.5. It depends on what you want, but both of these are the midpoints. I don't know why I'm saying midpoints. They're the exact same point. Okay, so both of those are the midpoint. All right, the last but certainly not least skill that we need to work on is finding the other endpoint. This, my friends, tends to be a little bit more difficult. Okay, you can do it with the equation. I don't recommend it. All right, I recommend taking the moment to graph it out. Okay, so if I plot the point at -1, +9, that is an endpoint. That is an endpoint. And then if I plot the point at -9, -10. -10. That is the other endpoint. Okay? Not the other endpoint. That is the middle or the midpoint. So what did we do to get from there all the way to the middle? Well, we went down by a whole lot and we went over by a decent amount. Whatever we did, we have to do it again. And then we get the new point. All right? And it doesn't have to be a pretty graph. My graph isn't very pretty, but it will work on a pretty graph as well as a hand-drawn graph that doesn't take too long to do. So what did we do? From the endpoint, we went down by 9 and then down by 10. So we went down by a whopping 19. That's a lot. And then we went over to the left by 8. We went from -1 to 9, which is to the left by 8. So I have to go down by another 19 and over by another 8. Well, right now, I'm at -10. If I go down by 19 from here, if I go down by 19 from there, I'm going to be at -29. That's really far down. And if I go over by 8, again from -9 over by 8, I'd be at -17. I would just go to the left by 8 more. All right? And when we get these two coordinates, which it looks sloppy because I almost ran out of room, we have the x value at -17. We have the y value at -29, and that would be the other endpoint. All right? Now, that works. It works better with smaller numbers. It happens that the first example did not have smaller numbers. It will also work if we use the midpoint formula, but we have to do it differently, okay? So remember that the midpoint formula means you add your x's and divide by 2. So we know the middle x value is -9. So if you set that equal to x1 plus that -1, if you want to call this like x2, and divide by 2, you could solve for that equation. If you multiply by 2, you get -18. -18 would equal x1 plus -1. And if we add that -1 over, you end up with the x value of -17 for that x value. And when we were doing this problem, what did we notice that the x value for that endpoint was? -17. The bad news is that that's only half the answer. You still have to do it for the y value of the midpoint too. So it's kind of annoying that you got to do it for the x and the y, but it is algebraic, so you don't have to graph anything, and it will work. So if this is the y value of the midpoint, we can call this y2. You could also call it y1. I just like calling it y2. Plug in the y value of the midpoint, and that y value of the midpoint is, again, the y values added together. And we knew that one of the y values is 9, so we do y1 plus 9 divided by 2. You're going to multiply by 2, and you get -20 would equal y1 plus 9. Subtract 9, -29 would equal that other y value of the midpoint. Not midpoint, excuse me, endpoint, which is what we got when we graphed it. So both ways work, and you might notice that there is a pattern to this equation thing, which is always double and then subtract the other endpoint. And if you subtract the negative, you got to add. All right? Both ways work, all of which are doable. I recommend the graphing technique. And to prove it to you, it kind of helps solidify what is going on with these things. So let's do one right here. We'll do 25. All right? It shows what's happening. We got -9, we got +7. That's an endpoint. That is the end. Then we have +10, -3. That is the middle. It shows what's going on when you graph it. We have gone from here to there. We have to do it again. So our endpoint, the other endpoint, has got to be somewhere over here. Well, we're just counting at this point. We went to the right by 9, then another 10. So if we're at 10, and this way we've gone to the right by 19, this was 7, we have to go to the right by 19 more. Well, if we go to the right by 19 more and we're at 10, now we're at 29. All right, so this endpoint is 29 comma something. Well, how much did we go down by? We went down by 7 and then another 3, so that's down by 7, and 3 is down by 10. If we go down by 10 from the negative 3, that would get us at negative 13. We just go down by another 10 from there. So this point right here is 29 comma negative 13. That's going to do it for this one, everybody. Until next time, stay positive, my friends, and I will see y'all later. Bye.